So it's easy to say that videos about video games have improved a lot since the mid-2000s.
Ah, 2D. You were so great to us, we had no need for a third dimension. Then things changed.
Nowadays, it's not that hard to find well-thought-out gaming videos and the like. However, the state of online gaming discussion is still far from perfect. It has certainly evolved over the years, but it's working with a bad foundation.
I mean, his game was a hit, got ported everywhere, and eventually is now on the PlayStation Network. But once he made the move to 3D, it was all over. What?
One of the most prevalent ways you see unfair gaming coverage is through players stubbornly clinging onto their preconceived notions. However, instead of people adapting and looking at what's actually there, they instead pedantically rip it apart for failing to achieve what it isn't even trying to. So that sort of thing is what this video is about. I realize it should probably be called Inappropriate Expectations in the Gaming Community as the basis for bad faith analysis, but that's pretty unworkable as a title, so meh. Now let's be fair, game design isn't the most accessible thing in the world. The most straightforward way to learn about it is through taking courses about it in college, but not every college offers it, and if you were accepted into a school that did, there's no guarantee that you'd be accepted into that program or even be able to afford it. You can also try to look up this stuff either by watching videos or reading books or whatever, but unless you already know what you're looking for, you need to be really careful. It's all too easy for a lot of people to find someone speaking authoritatively about the subject and just take what they say at face value. So, without any of that, what are you left with? Well, you could do what I did when I was a kid and get consumer game engines and just try to keep getting better, but that takes time and practice, and not everyone is going to be receptive to that. With that out of the equation, you have the main tool for game analysis a lot of people use online: comparison. However, this is where we come into our first issue. Comparison is a useful tool, but it can be a very bad foundation for analysis. Let's start off with a hypothetical situation where someone is reviewing a platformer. Outlandish, I know. You know what? Let's make one up. Son of Sploingus, Splendid Search for Sploingus. Perfect. As this person is reviewing Sploingus, they keep comparing it to Mario, and over the course of the analysis it becomes clear that they hold Mario as the key example of how to do a platformer. The problem is not every platformer is strictly trying to follow what Mario has done. Okay, plenty have, but right off the bat this is reductive. Let's say that in Sploingus you have a companion called Special Sam. You can throw him in any direction and you can home in on him mid-air before grabbing him and flinging yourself off of him. Let's say that Sploingus gets a lot of mileage out of this concept with both standard platforming, but also puzzle solving and more explorative elements. Yeah, Son of Sploingus, Splendid Search for Sploingus has Special Sam, but Super Mario Bros. 3 has a map system, gambling, mini-games, multiplayer, tons of power-ups, and is far more innovative than Sploingus. It simply has more to offer. Notice how all of that is surface level and doesn't really address either game's strengths or weaknesses. Sure, it compares a quantity of elements, but doesn't account for how well each game uses them, and otherwise just assumes that other than these elements, these games at their core are ultimately going for the same thing, which does a disservice to Sploingus and even Mario. Mario isn't just a bare-bones basic standard platformer with notoriety most of the time. Super Mario Bros. Was inspired by Pac-Land, but greatly expanded upon one of its ideas. Pac-Land had a lot of secrets. You could push objects and find other hats or even warp zones. The Mario platformers take that idea and just run with it. Whether it's 2D or 3D, Mario is about experimenting with your surroundings. In theory, any warp pipe could lead to something. Any block could have coins or a vine, etc. And games like Mario World in particular prove to be outstanding because they fully embrace this idea and take it as far as it can possibly go. When you set a single game up as the expectation to live up to, the only game that can live up to it is the one you just mentioned. However, paradoxically, it also does that game a disservice by reducing it to just a textbook example of how to make a game like this rather than a compelling game in its own right. So you might be saying, yeah, but that's a hypothetical. But what if I told you that not only have I seen this scenario play out repeatedly, but even dumber, and I think I have the perfect example of how ridiculous this can get. Now before I get started, I want to mention that I am not doing this out of malice. Lord knows I've said plenty of stupid shit on this channel. Also, both of these examples are variably old. That said, this is way too good of an illustration of what I'm talking about here. It's time to talk about Game Grumps and the Completionist playing Star Wars Rogue Squadron. What makes these examples interesting is that they fall into the same trap.
It's kind of like Star Fox 64 a bit.
They both go in, cite the alleged similarity, get confused,
Your objective here is to shoot at sand?
and proclaim that
I'll say this game hasn't aged well.
Next time on Game Grumps, different game, this one's lame.
Now, if you want to go out of your way to do so, you can make both games sound similar on paper. However, if you go any deeper than that, and I mean any deeper, not only do cracks form, but giant chasms. Star Fox is a series of arcade rail shooters. Rogue Squadron, on the other hand, is more of a strategy action game, and thus is more complicated. That said, while it can be overwhelming by design, it's very clear about what it wants from you.
Get back here as soon as you can. Rogue group, we are under... You heard him, full throttle, back to the scene.
We spotted an Imperial walker on approach to the Capitol Tower.
What it doesn't tell you is how to resolve the situation, because that's actually pretty open-ended, which is where a lot of the fun comes from. And it's not like the game doesn't do anything to ease you in either. The first mission is basically a well-disguised target practice. Probe droids are shooting at civilian homes and you have to fly around the map taking them all out. Since they're more or less small stationary targets, this allows you to practice lining up your shots. After you destroy all of them, TIE bombers come in and start bombing Mos Eisley. So you go from shooting stationary targets to shooting moving ones. So this mission is very straightforward. The map provides some room for exploration, but is on the whole pretty small and condensed. You have a radar pointing you in the direction of any probes you missed, not to mention all the other prompts. Now let's watch this confuse the shit out of JonTron.
Oh god, Disney owns this shit now. I wonder if they could make some cool stuff with it.
They could.
If they respect that license.
Oh, they will probably respect it miles more than Lucas does. Recently, they've been doing really well, so...
What am I doing? Oh!
Oh, we were supposed to protect the homesteads.
Okay.
Also, you were destroying them?
I was?
Oh god, is the completionist any better?
I had to physically get the game, then refer to the instruction manual on how to play it.
No. Fun fact, I didn't have the manual until a few years ago, and even now that I have it, there's not anything vital that's in here that isn't in the game. The game actually tells you quite a lot.
The Incom T-65 X-Wing is the fighter that killed the Death Star. An almost perfect balance of speed, maneuverability, and defensive shields makes this the fighter of choice for Rogue Squadron, except when the mission profile disallows it.
But okay, what exactly aren't you clear on?
Unfortunately, objectives can be sort of vague. Find the shield generator. Disable the train.
You could not have picked a worse example if you tried.
Lock S-foils in attack position. But not bad. There it is. Rogue group, use your ion cannon. We want to disable the train, not destroy it. Luke, I just did a long-range scan. Wedge is definitely on that train. Thanks, R2. The train is slowing down. Looks like this is working. This isn't gonna work. That was close.
Rogue Squadron, this is General Riken. Excellent work.
This isn't a situation of, oh, you need to have a high IQ to play Rogue Squadron. No, you just need to be ready to multitask, make quick decisions under pressure, and be alert. But you can't be doing that if you're just putting your fingers in your ears like la 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 la, this is Star Fox. Let alone well past the point where you should have realized that this isn't. And I don't even understand how they even got that impression to begin with. That said, having to go back to both of these videos, I must say that the Completionist's video is better than I remembered it being, versus the Game Grumps video, which actually manages to be even worse than I remember. Oh my god, someone in a suit! Clearly this is Halo! Where the fuck is the Needler? -1 out of 10, see me after class! I see this sort of nonsense a lot. especially as a fan of the Amiga and old Euro games. So many times I see other Americans play them, get confused by how different they are from the Japanese games that they're used to, and slam them with the typical "this hasn't aged well" or highly generalized statements about Western developed games back then in general. And yes, while many have aged poorly, I will not dispute that. So have many of the classics that they're used to, yet the same feelings of resentment don't remain because in many cases not only are they already more used to them and thus more blind to their design faults, but those got iterated upon and improved, whereas the games they're deriding never really got that chance. Comparison is a good tool to articulate your points more clearly, but it's generally not a good basis for critique. In fact, let's quickly go back to the aforementioned argument. It hasn't aged well, despite the issue often being refusal to listen to the game. In a weird way, that kinda says something about how often misused that argument has become. Now, I feel that discussing what has aged well and what hasn't is important. The more we can look at the past and find what works and what doesn't, the more we can make games better going forward. However, it feels like a lot of people weren't doing this out of looking for nuance, but rather to make what you like is bad content, despite this really having no bearing on that when you think about it. The gaming community has this weird issue of, I like it, therefore it has to be the best game ever under any circumstances, and it's had this since the beginning. But in truth, you're allowed to like crap. Unironically, even a superficial reason for liking something is a reason. You don't need to be a game design expert to defend your ability to enjoy a game, you can just enjoy it. This discussion shouldn't impede that, nor should it be done to shame you for liking something. Even when it isn't, I feel that a lot of discussion is agonizingly reductionist. A good example of reductionist conversation is the argument that limited lives are intrinsically a bad system to use. Over the past decade or so, I've heard the same argument used over and over again verbatim. Lives are outdated. It's a relic of the arcade days designed to steal your quarters. Games like Super Meat Boy show you that you can still be challenging without needing a live system. However, this is a really bad argument. The support really has no bearing on the game design impacts of including them, just an external issue at one point and the fact that some games don't need them. In games like Super Meat Boy, the level design is built around the lack of a live system. When you die, you start at the beginning of a stage. In many games with live systems, this is effectively what happens when you game over, so structurally, Super Meat Boy is more unforgiving than those games. However, the stages in Super Meat Boy are also really short and condensed. The game's structure fits the level design, but not every game is going to go for that specific style of level design. Ultimately, when making a game, it's all about deciding what works best for what you're trying to do, and what the impacts of including such a system are. While there are plenty of games that have live systems, but probably shouldn't, there are also games that have them, and if you took them away, those games would no longer work, or at minimum, would be far less engaging. Lives can serve many functions. They intrinsically add a perpetual risk versus reward system to an entire game, thus giving more meaning to actually completing stages and objectives. They can incentivize exploration and perfectionism, which can really work in games built around replayability. They can heighten the skill ceiling and serve as an indication of skill, and so on. Live systems don't fit every game, but they are very versatile and can do a lot of heavy lifting for a game's structure. Sure, there are games that find alternate means to incentivize the player to not die, but I don't think I've ever seen a life system replacement that can fill all the roles a life system can at once. There are times where using alternate means is a better choice for that game, but other times where it feels like a weak substitute. However, we can't assume the former will consistently be the case if our discussion around it doesn't develop beyond thing inherently bad. Hell, even when looking at arcade games, you can see the consequences of their removal. If you took the lives out of Pac-Man, there'd be no reason to get risky combos, fruit, aim for a high score, avoid ghosts, or do anything other than eat the dots, thus taking the tension and ultimately satisfaction away. It would break the entire game. If you took the lives out of Contra, you would be able to just brute force your way through everything and have no incentive to aim to do better than the bare minimum. So it's not just about stealing quarters, because even without that as a factor, a live system is still the best choice for these games, and they would fall apart without them in a sort of Jenga tower effect. Game design is less about any one thing you're doing, but how you're doing it, and whether or not it matches the other decisions you're making. It's like building a puzzle by crafting the pieces individually while ultimately in the end trying to make something that all fits. The flaws aren't necessarily about any individual piece, but if it doesn't fit the other pieces you've made, well, you have a problem. So really, this argument support not only has no bearing on the system being outdated, but also refuses to engage with how it is allegedly outdated as it hinges on something tangential. I like to call these Homsar arguments. This is bad because
I'm just a friendly reminder.
This is outdated because
I think I won the Powerball.
What an argument like that is proposing is that all games need to operate like the one mentioned, rather than encourage developers to look at the costs and benefits of each system and choose what's best for the game they're making. The problem with that is that when prevalent enough, discussion like this can limit what games get made, and when that happens, don't cry about gaming feeling stagnant, because it's your own fault. Collectathons are outdated. They're an excuse Mario 64 made to not have more levels. Other 3D platformers like Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius show that you don't need to be a collectathon to be a 3D platformer. Game discussion is more critical than it was in the late 2000s, but it's also way too reductive, mistaking pedantry with actual critique. Whether it be judging games for not being other games, or for arbitrary hangups you've developed because you've heard it repeated enough, or even, God forbid, this game I paid $5 for isn't 500 hours long. I'm going to riot in the streets. Doing stuff like this is actively setting the game for failure. It's only bad because you're not letting it be good. Maybe it's time we let games be good. Special thanks to the Sidequestian Gentleman and Mario123311 for supporting me on Patreon. You guys are awesome.